Okay, first of all, I met Scott Peterson November 20th, 2002.
Directly to the killer, who may be in this room.
I'm going to turn now to that new charge for the so-called doomsday mom, Lori Vallow, already charged in the killing of her two children. She is now being indicted for conspiracy to commit murder.
A violation of Penal Code Section 187 Prene, murder in the first degree. How do you plead?
Guilty.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of True Crime Headlines. This is week 35 of 2021, and this has been a big news week. I can hardly keep up with all of the Google notifications I got in my inbox and everything I was coming across. I literally just finished putting this whole episode together about 30 minutes before I sat down here to record it for you. So you are going to get the most updated information that I have. I've got a lot of stuff going on with Chad Daybell. We've got some stuff with Brian Chadwell, the suspect in the Delphi murders. We got some information about Paul Holes. But first, before we get started, if you would like to support this show and get a bunch of extra content, not just from True Crime Headlines, but also from our sister show, Paradise After Dark podcast, please consider signing up for our Patreon at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALAMAHAWK media.com. And let's just jump into it. Again, week 35 of 2021. We are going to start out with some news about Chad Daybell. First up, Chad Daybell trial could be delayed after accused murderer waives his right to speedy trial. Now, this first headline comes from New York Daily News. Chad Daybell may be waiting even longer to face a jury in the murder of wife Lori Vallow's children. Daybell's trial, currently set for November, will likely be pushed until 2022 after he waived his right to a speedy proceeding, the East Idaho News reported Wednesday. Criminal defendants typically have 6 months between their arraignment and the start of their trial. Daybell's legal team has already requested a change of venue, arguing he cannot face a fair jury in Fremont County. That hearing isn't scheduled until October 5th. As we all know, this is a case that shook the nation and dominated headlines. Daybell and Lori Vallow have been charged with the murder of her children, 7-year-old JJ and 17-year-old Tylee Ryan, who were reported missing in September 2019. Their bodies were found buried on Daybell's Idaho property on June 9th of 2020. Daybell and Vallow both faced multiple counts of murder for the two children, while Daybell has been charged in his wife's murder, and Vallow has been charged with conspiracy to commit murder in the death of her late husband, Charles Vallow, who was fatally shot by her brother, Alex Cox. Now, Lori Vallow is currently undergoing mental treatment under the custody of the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare, per the judge's orders. Meanwhile, Chad Daybell's children defend their father, say he was framed. Chad Daybell's children say their father was framed and had nothing to do with the deaths of J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan. Garth Daybell, Emma Murray, Seth Daybell, Leah Murray, and Mark Daybell spoke with 48 Hours in their first interview since their dad's case made national news. My father needs someone to be a voice for him, to let people know what's real, what we know, Emma Murray tells CBS News correspondent Jonathan Vigliotti. The children have remained relatively quiet over the past 18 months, but Murray, Garth, and Seth attended their father's arraignment on June 9th. They wore masks and sat behind Daybell as he pleaded not guilty to multiple felony charges, including first-degree murder. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty in this case. When Vigliotti asked the kids if their father played any role in the deaths of JJ and Tylee, they all immediately responded no. How is it possible 2 children are found buried in your father's backyard and he had nothing to do with it? The reporter asked Murray. She replied with, he was framed. More on Chad Daybell from Law and Crime. What caused Tammy Daybell's death? one of Chad Daybell's sons said authorities told him the answer. If you don't remember, Chad's wife Tammy, 49, died on October 19, 2019. She was found in the couple's bed in their home. Chad married Lori Vallow just days after his wife's death. One of Chad and Tammy Daybell's sons said that authorities told him his mother died of asphyxiation. They told me that she'd been asphyxiated, but we never saw an autopsy, Garth Daybell told 48 Hours. Asphyxiation does not necessarily mean smothered, said Mark Daybell, who joined his siblings in proclaiming Chad's innocence in killing Tammy. According to my understanding, it just means the breath was interrupted, and in the end, she wasn't able to breathe. And according to that, there's more facts we need. We don't just say, oh, well, bye, Chad. No, there's still love there. There's still connection. This information was gained from the autopsy that took place after investigators in Fremont County, Idaho, exhumed Tammy's body amid newfound suspicion. Fremont County Sheriff Len Humphreys declined in February 2021 to elaborate on the specifics of the autopsy, citing the ongoing investigation. Spokesperson Susan Ryan told Law & Crime on Tuesday that she cannot confirm if Tammy Daybell died of asphyxiation. So just a quick recap. Tammy's widower Chad marries new wife Lori Daybell just days after Tammy's October 2019 death. Lori left behind an ugly backstory. Her brother Alex Cox shot and killed her previous husband Charles Vallow when her family lived in Arizona in July of 2019. They moved to Idaho mere weeks later, and her children, Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow, disappeared that September. Lori and Chad lied to investigators and left Rexburg, Idaho, when police started looking into the kids' whereabouts that November, cops said. Cox died in December. This is Lori Vallow's brother, Alex Cox. He died in December of what Maricopa County, Arizona medical examiners called a blood clot. Investigators found Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow's remains in graves at Chad Daybell's Fremont County property. Now investigators say that Lori and Chad together murdered the children, that Cox helped in the conspiracy and even opened fire at Tammy days before she died, and that Chad ultimately murdered Tammy on October 19th. Lori is also charged in Arizona with conspiracy to murder her estranged husband, Charles Vallow. Oh my God. That was a mouthful. And yes, days before Tammy Daybell actually died, someone took a shot at her when she was exiting her vehicle in her own driveway. And this story just gets more and more nuts. I'm starting to understand the meaning of stranger than fiction. Investigators did not initially consider Tammy's death suspicious, and they did not perform an autopsy. The 5 Daybell children say that they, not their father, declined an autopsy in the initial investigation. The coroner initially told them it seemed that their mother died of natural causes, and they believed it because her health was failing, they say. The narrative is that he was going no autopsy, said Murray, talking about Chad. But he was standing there in complete shock, traumatized, letting us make the decision. If he was trying to hide something, I wouldn't leave something like that up to my kids if I was trying to hide something. Garth said he was there when his mother died. My room was down the hall, he said, and I heard a thump, and I heard my dad yell, Garth, come quick, with the most panicked I've ever heard in his voice. Again, the Daybell children argue that someone must have buried Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow on their father's property in order to frame him. They said the graves were shallow, which did not reflect Chad's experience as a grave digger. And I know exactly what you're thinking. Chad Daybell was a grave digger? Because that was my very first thought when I read that. So I went ahead and fact-checked that, and this is what I found. Chad Daybell worked as a cemetery sexton in Utah cemeteries, dug graves as a BYU student. So he previously worked as a cemetery sexton in Utah almost 20 years before his name made national headlines, according to a Desert News report from 2001. In the past, Chad Daybell made headlines for his work as a sexton in Utah cemeteries. Daybell dug graves while he was a student at Brigham Young University. He said he believed digging graves helped him through school. Daybell later worked as a sexton in Springville, the Desert News reported. His duties included digging graves and keeping things tidy. A sexton of a cemetery is often the caretaker of the cemetery. They are tasked with taking care of and maintaining the area as well as digging graves. According to the report, Daybell didn't see his job as glamorous, but he told Desert News a 4-year-old visitor referred to him as the sexy one. What? A 4-year-old calls you the sexy one and you feel that's appropriate to tell a news station? Seriously, this guy is such a creep. Taking care of the graves is rewarding as well as helping widows and grieving family members deal with the trauma, Daybell said. Sad times are always when you have to bury babies. That's always a poignant moment, Daybell added. He wrote about his experience in a non-fiction book titled 1 Foot in the Grave, Secrets of a Cemetery Sexton. The book is available on Amazon if you're interested. And that was a lot of doomsday craziness. So let's take a super quick break. And we are back and moving on. Next headline. FBI agent, Army Reserve Colonel, charged with sex crimes against children. An FBI agent who investigated sex crimes against children has been arrested and charged with multiple sex crimes against children across several states, according to the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. Deputies said Supervisory Special Agent David Harris was tasked with investigating crimes against children, including child pornography. But in February of this year, he was accused of exposing himself to a 14-year-old girl in a lewd and lascivious manner while on vacation in St. George Island. The investigation began in Franklin County, but because of Harris's role in the FBI, his status as a colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves, and the location of the witnesses and victims, the Department of Justice and the Office of the Inspector General joined the case. In the course of this investigation, evidence was obtained that led to other felony crimes committed by Harris of a sexual nature with minors and adults in the states of Louisiana and Texas, 5 jurisdictions and 3 states in all, deputies wrote. Records were obtained from Harris's issued government electronic devices, finding conversation excerpts from Harris claiming his sexual preference to underage females and admitting to his exploits. Harris, age 51, is currently in jail in Louisiana and facing a string of criminal charges, including indecency with a child, crimes against nature, and sexual battery, deputies wrote. Harris was arrested earlier this summer in Ascension Parish and is being held without bond. Harris also has outstanding arrest warrants pending from East Baton Rouge and Orleans Parish. He also has an outstanding arrest warrant out of Tyler, Texas. Investigators said evidence in Texas suggests that crimes go back for several years. Franklin County deputies added that Harris has been fired by the FBI. That just goes to show you that anyone, even an FBI agent, can be a predator. Next up, Laci Peterson's family is, quote, stressed as Scott Peterson seeks new trial. The nightmare continues. Scott Peterson is seeking a new trial after his murder conviction for the 2002 death of his wife Laci and their unborn son Connor, and the legal maneuvering is opening up old wounds for Laci's family. Everyone is stressed about the possibility of a new trial, a family source tells People. There's no closure. The nightmare continues day after day. It has been painful every single day since Christmas Eve 2002, the day Laci went missing. Peterson was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to death in 2005. But Peterson, now 48, scored 2 major legal victories in 2020. The first victory was in August when his death penalty sentence was overturned, meaning that he would face a new penalty phase trial. The second victory came in October when the California Supreme Court ruled that a lower court should take a second look at his case to determine whether his guilty verdict should be overturned. Earlier this week, Peterson appeared in court to petition for a new trial. At issue whether a juror lied about her experiences with domestic violence in an attempt to be seated on the panel. The defense team contends that Peterson did not get a fair trial. The judge has not yet issued a ruling on the latest arguments. Peterson's sister-in-law, Janie, also spoke out on Wednesday saying that new evidence excludes Scott Peterson from being the killer of Lacey and Connor. There's evidence that was completely ignored that shows Lacey was alive after Scott left for the day, Janie, who is married to Scott's brother, said. But also, there was no evidence that he had anything to do with what happened to Lacey. We don't have justice, Janie Peterson continued. This crime is not solved. But Lacey's family steadfastly believes that Scott Peterson was solely responsible for her murder, and they oppose any attempt for him to get a new trial. We believe very strongly that the right person is in prison, said the family source. There is no murderer at large. Scott Peterson was convicted and put in jail. This case was solved. It's unclear when the judge will render a decision on the request for a new trial. Okay, next up. This is a definite strange story that I stumbled upon this week. I'll call this the weird story of the week. Maybe I'll make that like a segment. Like every week we'll have weird story of the week. I don't know. We'll see. Illinois brothers in custody after telling police they buried mother and sister in backyard. 2 brothers have been taken into custody after police discovered 2 bodies buried in the backyard of their home in Lyons, Illinois, according to a report from Fox 32 Chicago. The brothers had claimed they buried their mother and their sister in the backyard. Police discovered the bodies while conducting a welfare check at 3950 Center Avenue. Officers said that the house had no running water or working toilets and that the back door was barricaded. The residence was described as a hoarder home filled with items and waste from floor to ceiling, including feces and bottles filled with urine. Multiple cats and dogs were present. Lyons Police Chief Thomas Harrian said officials spoke with Michael Lelko, 45, and John Lelko, 41, who admitted to burying their mother and sister in the backyard after their deaths in 2015 and 2019. John Lelko, who was found by police in ill health, lived upstairs in the house. According to the brothers, their mother was in her 70s when she died, and their 44-year-old sister had hit her head and died in the past year. The Lelko brothers told Fox 32 they buried their relatives because they couldn't afford a funeral and due to COVID-19 fears. Yet, they said their sister died in 2019, and COVID wasn't really a thing until March of 2020, so those dates don't really match up anyway. Officials reportedly entered the home in hazmat suits, removing the animals from the house and sending the men to a hospital for a physical and mental evaluation. The brothers have since been released. According to Harrion, the 2 men suffered from both physical and mental health conditions. Obviously, concealment of a death is a felony in Illinois. If it turns out it's a homicide, homicide is a more serious offense. The bodies have not yet been identified, but investigators say they will use DNA to determine whether the remains are in fact the brothers' biological relatives. A Village of Lyons spokesperson told WSL-TV that charges against the brothers are pending. Officials have brought in archaeologists and evidence technicians to dig in the backyard and search the house for evidence. The incident is being treated as a homicide investigation. Next up, Jodi Arias trial judge retiring after 20 years on the bench. Maricopa County Superior Court Judge Sherry Stevens, who notably presided over the infamous murder trial of Jodi Arias in 2013, will be stepping down from the judicial bench. Stevens announced her retirement from the Superior Court last Thursday after a 20-year career of overseeing the Valley's criminal, civil, and family court cases. Stevens came under the national media spotlight when she spent months managing the notorious criminal case of Jodi Arias. Arias was convicted of killing her ex-boyfriend Travis Alexander at his home in Mesa in 2008. She was found guilty by a jury and is currently serving a life sentence without a chance of parole. Arias' lawyers criticized Judge Stevens for allowing their client's trial to be turned into a circus by permitting the media to cover nearly every moment of the proceedings. Shortly after the jury announced Arias' guilty verdict, a huge crowd of spectators could be heard cheering outside the courthouse. The case attracted national attention and has gone on to become the subject of several documentaries and made-for-television movies. Prosecutors were forced to conduct a retrial for the penalty portion of Arias' conviction, and Stevens prohibited television cameras from coming into the courtroom during that retrial. Judge Stevens additionally presided over the famous case of Brittany Zamora, the 6th grade teacher from Goodyear who pleaded guilty to having sexual relations with one of her students. Stevens sentenced Zamora to 20 years in prison. No decision yet on James Chadwell's request for a change of venue. James Chadwell, the man accused of attempting to murder and assault a 9-year-old girl and possible suspect in the Delphi murders, was in court on Tuesday. His attorneys are asking for a change of venue for the trial. The defense argued that national news stories have linked Chadwell to the Delphi murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. They also said that since the Carroll County Sheriff's Office has not cleared Chadwell's name yet, it could create bias within a jury locally. They also argued that because Chadwell's entire criminal record was exposed in a news story out of South Dakota, it will be hard for him to get a fair trial. The state, who is prosecuting Chadwell, argued that since the jury trial isn't until October 19th, members who could be selected for the jury likely won't have any of the coverage fresh in their minds. The defense said if they aren't able to get a change of venue, they would like to at least have a test jury. A test jury, or sometimes called a mock jury, they hear actual testimony and struggle with real jury instructions in an atmosphere similar to a courtroom. Videotaped deliberations show that mock jurors understand the primary issues in cases, even though they see an abbreviated presentation. Judge Stephen Mayer is taking the request under advisement, meaning he will decide on whether or not to grant the change of venue at a later date. Whew! Next up, I told you this was a big week in the news. Judge says case against former Parkland School resource officer Scott Peterson can go to trial. This is another Scott Peterson. This Scott only has one T in his name, and it looks funny when you read it. It's S-C-O-T, Peterson. Common spelling. A Florida judge ruled that a case may proceed against former Broward County Sheriff's Deputy Scott Peterson, a school resource officer who was widely criticized after he failed to confront a shooter during the deadly massacre at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in February of 2018. Broward County Circuit Judge Martin Fine denied a motion to dismiss 11 charges, including counts of felony child neglect, according to Peterson's attorney, Mark Iglarsh. While we are extremely disappointed with the judge's decision and plan to appeal, we take solace in knowing that the truth will come out at trial. My client is innocent of any criminal wrongdoing and did all he could to save lives during the massacre. The public has been fed a false narrative about Scott Peterson. We have overwhelming evidence proving that the numerous actions that my client took during the attack was done to save lives, the attorney added. Peterson, 58, spoke to the media after the first court session on Wednesday. "I'll never forget that day," an emotional Peterson said of the shooting in which 17 people were killed. According to a video from CNN affiliate WPLG, "Not only kids died, I had friends that died. Never for a second would I sit there and allow anyone to die knowing that animal was up there in the building. Never." Days after the Valentine's Day shooting, footage surfaced of Peterson taking position near the 700 and 800 buildings at the high school, a spot he stayed at for more than 45 minutes. Prosecutors are taking a novel approach and will have to show that Peterson, a law enforcement officer, was a caregiver and exposed students and teachers to harm with his actions, with reckless disregard for their lives, attorneys have told CNN. The shooter confessed to the shootings, the deadliest high school shooting in U.S. history. 17 other people were wounded. Now, his trial date has not been scheduled. Christian Bahina Rivera sentenced to life without parole for murdering Molly Tibbetts in 2018. Now, just to give a quick little recap of this case, on July 18th of 2018, 20-year-old Molly Tibbetts, a former cross-country runner, left the home of her boyfriend's brother in Brooklyn, Iowa for an evening jog. She was last seen at approximately 7:30 p.m. and was reported missing by her family when she did not show up for work the following day. According to police, her last confirmed communication was with her boyfriend of 3 years, shortly before leaving for her jog. Her boyfriend was out of town for work in Dubuque, Iowa, over 130 miles away. He told investigators he received a Snapchat message from her later in the evening that appeared to show her indoors. Over the next several weeks, police in multiple states investigated hundreds of leads in the case, including an unconfirmed sighting at a truck stop in Kearney, Missouri, later confirmed to have been false, but were not able to locate Tibbetts. They received over 2,300 tips and conducted over 500 interviews during the course of the investigation. About 4 weeks after Tibbetts' disappearance, police said that the search had been refocused to several specific areas in and around Brooklyn, including her boyfriend's home, a truck stop, a car wash, and 2 area farms. Prior to the discovery of Tibbetts' body, monetary reward for information leading to closure in the case had reached over $366,000, surpassing the previous record reward amount raised by the local Crime Stoppers branch. As the money was to be used as a reward on the condition of her safe return, Crime Stoppers announced that the money would be returned to those who requested it, or dispersed to the General Crime Stoppers Fund and or to the Tibbetts family. On October 21st, police in Iowa announced that a body had been found in Poweshiek County, where Tibbetts' hometown of Brooklyn is located. The body was identified as Tibbetts in an autopsy that was conducted 2 days later by the Iowa State Medical Examiner. They had been led to the site by the 24-year-old suspect, Christian Bahina Rivera. On August 23rd, the Iowa State Medical Examiner performed an autopsy and recorded the cause of death as multiple sharp force injuries and the manner as homicide. A judge on Monday sentenced convicted murderer Christian Bahina Rivera to life in prison without parole. This is the mandatory sentence under law. In May, jurors found Bahina Rivera attacked Tibbetts in 2018 while she was jogging and then dumped the victim's body in a cornfield. Bahina Rivera confessed to investigators that he killed Tibbetts, prosecutors said at trial. In this account, he saw Tibbetts jogging in Brooklyn, Iowa, approached her, blacked out, ostensibly wiping his memory of the murder, and hid her body in a cornfield. He walked back this confession in testimony, attempting to argue that 2 unknown men abducted him from his living room at gunpoint and knife point, forced him to drive them around, and then one of them killed Tibbetts. Even after his conviction, his defense attorneys tried to seek a new trial. saying a jailhouse witness could testify to hearing another inmate confess to killing Tibbetts with another individual and framing an unnamed Hispanic man for the crime. Jurors did not believe Bahena Rivera's testimony, and the defense's post-trial argument only pushed back sentencing to Monday. In reviewing the evidence and testimony provided at trial, the court finds the verdict was not contrary to the weight of the evidence, wrote Judge Joel Yates, according to the Associated Press. Okay, next up, and this is a really interesting one I got in my inbox as a special report from the Sun Sentinel. Plane crash victim was serial killer who murdered at least 3 in South Florida. 16 years after he died in a plane crash, a man from Brazil was identified Tuesday as the serial killer who took the lives of 3 women on the streets of South Florida, stuffing 2 of them into suitcases and discarding them on the roadside like trash. The murders went unsolved for 2 decades, but investigators ultimately dug up the body of Roberto Wagner Fernandez in Brazil and matched his DNA to the Broward County slayings. Law enforcement on Tuesday named Fernandez as a serial killer that has long dodged authorities. They say he beat the bodies of 2 Broward County women and stuffed them in luggage, tossing them on the roadside. Another woman who also worked the streets as a prostitute along Biscayne Boulevard was stabbed repeatedly and discarded in the bay. For years, the serial killer eluded police in Broward County. But Tuesday, Sheriff Gregory Toney and officials from the City of Miami Police Department said they found the killer. His body was exhumed from a grave in Brazil. The DNA matched. His death was not faked. Why would it be faked, you ask? Fernandez of Miami fled back to his native Brazil after stabbing to death Jessica Good in late August 2001. A year earlier, in August 2000, authorities say he killed Cia Dema. The 21-year-old Wilton Manor woman was beaten and stuffed in a suitcase that was left along the road in Cooper City. Weeks before that, Fernandez's target was Kimberly Dietz Leavesey, 35, of Fort Lauderdale. Her beaten body was shoved in a duffel bag and left just blocks from the Broward County Medical Examiner's office in Dania Beach. The 3 cases shared similar fact patterns. As a detective from the sheriff's office and Miami police worked together, clues began to emerge. DNA evidence was collected from all 3 crimes, pointed to one as yet unknown culprit. Also, fingerprints from the evidence collected at 2 crime scenes were a match, but the identity of the killer remained a mystery. When Miami police identified Fernandez as a suspect, he had already fled to Brazil, a country with no extradition treaty. But all was not safe back home. Fernandez became a suspect in a sexual assault in Brazil. He then learned of possible assassins hired to avenge his wife's death. She was killed in 1996. He was arrested, though acquitted of the crime, claiming self-defense. Not long after that, he came to South Florida. When Fernandez learned someone may be after him for his wife's death, he tried to run again. A licensed pilot, Fernandez's plane crashed while fleeing Brazil for Paraguay. Authorities say Fernandez also worked as a flight attendant and a Miami tour bus driver. He was identified Tuesday by Broward County Sheriff's Office and Miami Police Department. A major break came in 2011 when DNA from the Miami homicide matched the unknown suspect DNA collected from the Broward County murders. Additionally, fingerprints from Fernandez after the death of his wife years earlier matched the fingerprints from the crime scenes. Investigators traveled to Brazil to attempt to take DNA evidence from Fernandez. However, they learned that he left Brazil for Paraguay and reportedly died in a plane crash there in 2005. Detectives were not ready to accept that the suspect in these violent crimes would escape justice. Investigators worked closely with the Brazilian National Police, the U.S. Department of Justice, and the FBI to continue their investigation into Fernandez. Those efforts involved exhuming Fernandez's body to determine if he was truly dead, and if he was, whether he was a match to the evidence collected from the murders. At the very least, the victims' families deserve those answers, the sheriff's office said. During late 2020 and early 2021, Fernandez's grave was opened and his remains were found inside. Most importantly for the victim's family, his DNA profile was consistent with the unknown suspect profile collected from the crime scenes of Kimberly Dietz, Leavesey, Sia Demis, and Jessica Good. We were fortunate that both our government here and the partnership we had with Brazil afforded these men and women an opportunity to further investigate and get to a point where they exhumed the body to connect DNA evidence confirming the suspect. Roberto Fernandez was indeed responsible for the brutal murders of all three of these women, Sheriff Tony said. South Florida officials thought Fernandez might have faked his death to avoid prosecution for the killings in South Florida, as well as to outsmart the hired assassins who were hunting him. There are possibly more victims, law enforcement announced. And last but not least, on this week's episode of True Crime Headlines, Monthly Talk with Mayor features discussion with investigator of Golden State Killer. Danville, California Mayor Renee Morgan will chat Friday, today, with former cold case investigator, writer, and podcaster Paul Holes, #HotForHoles, about the Golden State Killer case and this month's Town Talks with the Mayor. As an investigator for the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office, Holes helped solve the decades-old case using advancements in DNA profiling and genealogy technology. This case helped launch Holes' new true crime podcast, The Murder Squad, that explores evidence and discussions of current unsolved murders, unidentified remains, and missing persons cases. Former police officer Joseph James D'Angelo Jr. was finally arrested after a 13-year crime spree during which he is believed to have committed at least 13 murders, 50 rapes, 120 burglaries between 1973 and 1986. He was caught in 2018 and is currently serving 26 life sentences. The conversation will take place via Zoom at 9 a.m. Friday, September 3rd. That's today. The recording will later be uploaded to the Town of Danville's YouTube channel and posted on the town's website, www.danville.ca.gov. And that's it for this week's episode of True Crime Headlines. Again, week 35 of 2021. I will be back talking at you next Friday. In the meantime, again, if you'd like to support the show, please consider subscribing to our Patreon, patreon.com/PalmahawkMedia. Hit me up on the social medias. If you have any juicy crime stories, please send them over to me. Thanks for listening to True Crime Headlines. And I'll keep reporting as long as it's safe to do so.
Okay, first of all, I met Scott Peterson November 20th, 2002.
Directly to the killer, who may be in this room.
I'm going to turn now to that new charge for the so-called Doomsday Mom, Lori Vallow. Already charged in the killing of her two children, she is now being indicted for conspiracy to commit murder.
A violation of Penal Code Section 187 Prene, murder in the first degree. How do you plead?
Guilty.